Welcome to the JB podcast, and I haven't gotten my thoughts out on the craziness that went on with my favorite team, the Brooklyn Nets. Today I'm going to get into it, and then I want to completely close the book on the craziness that has gone on the last 3-4 years. It's going to be a big rant today. It's coming up next on the JB podcast. So it's All-Star Weekend, and I don't know about you guys. I'm not really excited about it. I would have been excited for it if it was a month ago, because I know a month ago I was excited when I found out that the two best players on the Brooklyn Nets at the time, Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, were the only teammate All-Star starters in the NBA. And I was really excited for this spring coming up. We got baseball season coming soon. We got the Yankees, right? And I'm a big Yankee fan, so I was getting ready for another year of contending. And the New Jersey Devils are exciting this year. Let's see if they can make a run at the Stanley Cup. Pretty much all three New York hockey teams are formidable. And I think it was going to be really fun to have Katie and Kyrie in Brooklyn making my favorite team, by the way, out of everything. Out of every team I root for, the Brooklyn Nets are my squad. So them coming in to, even with Durant hurt and all that, I still figured we weather the storm, and Kyrie looked to be playing well, and I was getting ready for a possible run at maybe not a title, but just an entertaining, stretch of basketball with the thought of at least a chance at this working out. Well, Kyrie Irving had to ruin all of that because of the trade request from 2 weeks back. And when it comes to Kyrie Irving, I have had many thoughts. And before I get started on all this, I would just like to apologize to mainly Boston Celtics fans. Cavalier fans, I think they still have some level of respect and love for Kyrie for helping them bring a championship over there. I think he still has his demons over there, and some people maybe still haven't forgiven him for leaving like that. But when it comes to Boston, they have no love for Kyrie and what he did there. And I just would like to apologize. However, I am going to state something here. Kyrie Irving was the narrative around him basically was that he was a bad teammate. And while I think he was that in Brooklyn, when you look into some of his actions, it's not really, I don't think a good teammate would really do those things. But he also did these crazier things, like not getting the vaccine, posting anti-Semitic videos. It all just wouldn't stop with this guy. And I loved watching him play. I respect him as a basketball player. But he himself is just not worth it when you consider all of the insanity he brought to the franchise. And if you're going to hear all these defenders of him, it's important to know that the team really didn't do that well when he was playing. They did great on this stretch with KD, but when KD was out, they still were fine. They weren't really that great. And I think the narrative around him is that he's the most skilled player ever lived, or one of them, right? The best handlers. But when you watch him play, he usually gets around 30 a game, right? Maybe sometimes efficiently, maybe sometimes inefficiently. Sometimes he'll explode. But against teams with length, he really struggles. And sometimes you'll get the game where it doesn't look like he's passing the other players or getting anybody else really involved, and he's kind of just chucking shots. And if he's not making them, oh, whoops. That's really what it kind of comes down to. And for let's start in 2019, right? With the mood swings because he wouldn't take a hat off. Now, I was someone who was defending him at this point. I was defending him in certain situations, like, but I couldn't defend him with him throwing his teammates under the bus after the 76ers game in 2019, I believe it was, where he basically played horrible and then criticized Sean Marks' job on the roster when Durant wasn't even there yet. So you couldn't even fully judge the product, but apparently Irving was already doing that. He gets a shoulder injury. I don't know how legit that shoulder injury was. A lot of people seem to think it's phony, but you're hurt, you're hurt. I don't care. The next year, just says we don't need a coach. That ended up being circled over and over again. I didn't think it was that big of a deal at the time, but it turned out to be because it was so obvious that it set a tone for Steve Nash that would never go away. Steve Nash was never respected um, after that. And he also didn't tell him that he was bailing for 2 weeks for either social justice or for his sister's birthday. And even at that, I still kind of defended. I was like, listen, when he's on the court, he's going to play well. But the whole vaccine thing, that is what really made things awkward and horrible. Because that's the reason James Harden left. And listen, I think it's pretty obvious at this point. If you saw James Harden's quotes after the Nets Sixers game not too long ago, I believe it was Saturday night, about a week ago, he basically called out Kyrie Irving without calling out Kyrie Irving by name. He even, said, kind of defended the organization in a way when he said the organization was upset that we didn't all get together on the floor. And I don't understand how it's Sean Marks' fault that he builds a roster strictly for these three guys to play, KD, Harden, and Kyrie, and one of the guys just doesn't show up. So when Kyrie Irving made this trade request, this is obviously, we're fast forwarding. This is obviously, he doesn't play well in the Boston Celtics series. He has one great game. They end up losing. He screws up the final possession offensively, ends up killing us at the end. And then he doesn't play well in the rest of the series, like, at all. It was one of the worst few games I'd seen from him. Makes all these excuses. Well, I wasn't there all the time, wasn't able to build continuity. Just the lack of accountability that he was the reason, saying him, Joe Tsai, Sean Marks, and Kevin Durant are going to help build the Nets and help figure things out. Meanwhile, he's missed basically the whole season, and he's the reason why the super talented trio of him, Harden, and Durant is basically no more. And then in the summer, wants his money. He says all these things about, I'm going to take the consequences. I accept the consequences for not taking the vaccine shot. Well, that's not really accurate because it's affecting your contract. And it's not just the Nets. The Nets do their research. They knew Kyrie had no other options in the summer, which is why they did what they did. They basically were like, okay, go out and find other offers, right? Couldn't find him. So he has to walk back in with basically his tail between his legs, right? And he says, all right, I'm coming back playing for the next year. But there was always this thing that he always said he was committed, but it just didn't seem right. It just seemed like the second he had a moment to leave, he would leave. And, you saw the reports lately with the Nets possibly wanting, his agent, his stepmother saying, we'd like to stay in Brooklyn. It's in their hands. And basically he wants he wants the contract extension by the deadline. The Nets are still like, hey, listen, you played a month and a half and you posted this anti-Semitic video in the beginning of the season. And just because of 2 months of basketball, like, we're going to pay you 4 years. I mean, here's the other thing about Kyrie Irving that no one really talks about and pretty much people have forgotten. The narrative about Kyrie before all this was that he got injured a lot. He got hurt a lot. So if you take into account this guy is 6'2", basically, right? He struggles offensively, which is the only thing he provides productive. He's an underrated defender, I guess. But when you put him against Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown in a switching scheme, they're going to target him every time. He struggles against teams with length because they target him when he's on defense. And offensively, he struggles to get going. So you take that into account. You take into account all the distractions he brings to your team. He creates this awkward tone in a locker room just because from things he says, things he posts, his beliefs. Which listen, your beliefs are your beliefs, but I'm sure not. I'm sure everybody in the Nets organization, not everybody, but a lot of people in the Nets organization, not even just the Nets, the NBA, didn't want to take the vaccine. There's a certain amount of people who didn't want to take it, but they ended up taking it. And Kyrie Irving apparently uh, doesn't care about that. He doesn't care that, obviously you're playing for something here. You have to play as a team. And he didn't respect that. He didn't respect showing up all the time. He showed up for around 55% of the games in his 4 years in Brooklyn, or I guess you could say 3.5. It was just a disaster because this guy wouldn't show up to play. So after the Kyrie trade, he was traded for Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith. It's been about 2 weeks since then. That 2029 first-round pick, I liked the package. And I was hoping that Kevin Durant would realize that, despite this Irving chaos, I can come back. We got a long point guard, right? We got who's familiar with what they do there, right? Jacques Vaughn has been there for years. Dorian Finney-Smith, awesome 3-and-D guy. I was hoping that Durant would come around and be like, okay, maybe another piece there, here and there, and go to war with this team. Maybe try to trade for a star in the summer because you got more draft picks that you could trade. Unfortunately, Kevin Durant just seemed tied at the hip with Kyrie. And he just didn't see a future where the Nets can break through. If you saw his press conference a few days ago, he said it was tough to stomach Kyrie Irving's trade request. He was shocked by it. He was disappointed he didn't, finish out the year. And that's just a shame, and it just goes to show that Kyrie Irving's supposed to be on his best behavior to get this contract extension. He is so unbelievably talented. I really do love watching him play. And I think in regards to him as a basketball player, you can win with him because he's already done it before. I've always questioned the fact you can't win with Kyrie. Well, he won. So I don't really know what that means. He has a championship. I just think ever since he just does not understand the consequences of his actions, the unfairness to fans of the organizations that he plays for, and the ownership of those teams. It's unfair to Sean Marks and Joe Tsai, his buddy Kevin Durant, to James Harden, who basically forced his way out of Houston, to be so unreliable. And it wasn't unreliable because of injury. If he was hurt, that'd be a different story. We wouldn't be saying these things. But the problem with Kyrie Irving is that he doesn't think what he's doing is so detrimental. And we'll see how it works in Dallas. I'm of the opinion it will not work because I have no reason in his past to think that it will work. Okay, you look back at that Cleveland team with LeBron James, right? Not only is LeBron James, and listen, I give him all the credit in the world for making that shot. He showed up in that series. He was absolutely awesome. He was awesome the year after that. He's a great, unbelievable player. He showed up in those games. He earned that, okay? He's earned everything in his career, especially this criticism, because he has done unbelievably crazy things in recent memory, whether it's not showing up to Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals back in 2018 when the Celtics were playing the Cavs. People watched that. He said basically to the Boston Celtics fans, probably one of the biggest fan bases you don't want to piss off, said he's coming back, basically goes back on his word 2 months later, saying, ask me July 1st what I'm doing. Teams up with Durant. Okay, you got your second co-star. Here we go. You're in Brooklyn. You're playing for your childhood team. You're trying to push that narrative, homegrown kid. But basically you wanted to go there so you can do whatever the hell you wanted. And it's a shame because he's an unbelievably great basketball player, and I have so much respect for him as a basketball player. But as a person and what he's done to Nets fans, I mean, how many Nets fans are so relieved that he's gone? And here's my warning to Dallas, right? He won the first two games in Dallas, and it seemed all kumbaya, it was all great. He bashed Brooklyn, saying how they disrespected him, which is hilarious. Basically, the Nets didn't want to give him fully 4 guaranteed years because he didn't earn it. And I don't think most teams would do that. Dallas is desperate enough to where they might do it. I think Kyrie Irving plays out this year in Dallas. I don't know what will happen in the summer. I'm assuming he re-signs in Dallas unless it goes horribly wrong this year. And that's a big L for Dallas because you got rid of, listen, that team was struggling without Luka because they didn't have many talented players. Now they have even less talented players if Kyrie bails. So you're basically planning to re-sign him. The thing is Dallas, you have everything that's coming to you with this Kyrie Irving signing or trade. It's earned because Irving has proved now, time and time again, that the ending of his tenure with your team doesn't end well. And Luka's not going to be with this. He's not going to be like Durant. Durant was the type of person who wouldn't criticize him, right? Even Harden, to an extent, didn't criticize him probably because Durant was there and Harden was just like, this wasn't what I signed up for, and he left. I just feel like Luka's not going to stand for this. And if Kyrie just starts missing games when they need him the most, he's already done it, by the way, recently. Listen, if he's hurt, he's hurt, but I can't trust Kyrie Irving, so I don't know. But he sat out the Denver Nuggets game recently with back tightness. Okay, well, the Denver Nuggets are the number 1 seed. Dallas is now the 7th seed. They need every win they can get, basically. And for a team that doesn't defend, I believe they're 0-3 ever since Luka came back. Kyrie's played 2 of those games. It is a problem, in my opinion, that against the 1 seed in the West, a game that you need, right? A game that you need your second best player to be there for, because the first best player is there. You need them to show up and play. And it was very disappointing that Irving didn't play that game. Now listen, back tightness, if that's true, it's true. Irving gets hurt. You need to rest him and manage him. But it's funny that you have to rest him and manage him, and because he has an injury history. Also, he does things that distract from the team and often leaves games anyway with, because it just doesn't seem like basketball's his number 1 priority. And which is crazy because when you're that talented, you have a crazy work ethic, right? He said, nobody talks about my work ethic. They talk about what I do off the court. Yeah, that's because what you do off the court is so detrimental and crazy that it distracts from that. And he needs to know that. Now, I'm not going to be somebody that's going to tell Kyrie Irving what to do. You got to be somebody, you want to be yourself. That's all great. But you now have a history. He talks about changing the narrative. Well, you know what, Kyrie? It doesn't really change the narrative if you go to Dallas and he says things like, I don't want to talk about my future here. I don't want to bring distractions to the team. Yeah, that itself is kind of a distraction in a way. I don't want to overthink that. I don't know what else he's supposed to say, I guess. But he's put himself in this situation where people are constantly questioning what he's going to do in the future. And if he leaves for, say, the Lakers, let's say they don't bring back D'Angelo Russell, although I don't think that will happen. I think he will be in Dallas. But I just don't see that team playing that great with literally no defense around them. And I think Luka and Kyrie is going to be fine. I think that's a really good basketball fit. I think people overrate there's only one ball thing. I mean, you see it in Brooklyn. If you watch the highlights of Kyrie Irving, James Harden, Kevin Durant on the court, those guys were great. They were great together. They worked perfectly. So when you get 2 guys that are that good on the court together, they're going to be fine. I have no issues with the Luka-Kyrie fit on the court. The problem is they play 0 defense, and you need to be able to defend. And honestly, if we're looking at all the Western Conference teams, right? Golden State, I know they have Steph Curry out, but when Steph Curry comes back, I'm taking Golden State over Dallas. I'm sorry. Phoenix now has Kevin Durant. They're my favorite to win the championship. I know I still want to see them play a little bit, but I think they're my favorite. Even if Chris Paul does get injured, I think the depth thing is a little overrated. We'll get into that later. But what's really important here is, yeah, Dallas can beat Sacramento, right? They can beat Memphis, maybe, right? Memphis is 4-6, I think, in their last 10 games. Heading into the break, they seem like a bunch of cocky dudes, and all talk to an extent. But Memphis showed signs last year they could be a really good playoff team against Golden State, right? Ja gets hurt, all that. But can they beat Minnesota? I mean, Anthony Edwards looks really good right now. I don't know. Dallas is a 7th seed right now, and there's not that much time left in the season to get acclimated to what they want to do. And Kyrie Irving is somebody that doesn't really help your team in the chemistry department, to put it nicely. So it'll be interesting. I think that's going to end up being a disaster. I think the Brooklyn Nets getting Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, 2 excellent guys who are going to show up and play. They're going to show up and play hard and play well. And they got that 2029 first round pick unprotected. Who knows if Luka's even there? And judging that Kyrie Irving's on his team, I don't know. This feels a lot. I know this comparison's been used many times. I know I'm going to sound like a salty Nets fan here, but it's just the truth. And this is just my actual feelings on this, because I have a very different feeling for Phoenix. This reminds me a lot about LeBron's first stint with Cleveland, right? When they got him Mo Williams, and they got him Antoine Jameson, and they tried to surround him with talent. They got Luka Porzingis. They got him now Kyrie, who's basically an excellent basketball player who's got a really shaky resume at this point now in the last 6 years. So we'll see how it works. I think they're going to be awesome to watch. They're going to score a lot of points. Ultimately, I don't think they go anywhere. In my opinion, they're a first-round exit, despite the greatness of Luka Doncic. And I think that's going to shock some people. I think a lot of people see them at least going to the second round. I don't know. I don't see it. Because I know how Irving plays in some playoff games with teams with length. Maybe if they're a 6th seed, they play Sacramento, and Sacramento's a 3rd seed, which I don't think is going to happen either. I think Phoenix is going to catch up. If they play Phoenix in the first round, good night. I'm not taking Dallas. So those are my opinions on Kyrie Irving and the Dallas Mavericks and that whole situation. Moving on to Kevin Durant. I love Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant gave everything he had when he was on the court for us. He never quit. I think the only time you could see maybe he was exhausted from the whole situation, I think it wasn't him quitting or anything. It was that Celtics series last year. It was his worst playoff series, I think, by far in his career. I could be wrong about that. I don't think I am. I had never seen him play worse than that. It was so uncharacteristic, and I think he was mentally exhausted from the craziness that went on last year. Harden wanting out, Irving not getting the vaccine. And when Kevin Durant requested a trade over the summer, I was annoyed. I was annoyed at him because I was annoyed that he failed to see the organization's point of view to why things weren't going the way they should have been. Sean Marks has built up a lot of criticism recently. He was literally the golden child before he signed KD and Kyrie. Even when when he got Harden, he was still the golden child. As soon as Kyrie decided not to get vaccinated, people started poking holes at the roster, right? They started, criticizing the Patty Mills acquisition. Meanwhile, when Patty Mills first signed with the Nets, everyone was like, oh my God, the Nets got Patty Mills. Right? Blake Griffin, they re-signed him. Blake turns out to be significantly worse than he was the year prior with the Nets in the playoffs when he was starting at center and playing good defense on Giannis. Probably the best defense Giannis had seen in the playoffs that year. He just wasn't the same player the next year. LaMarcus Aldridge played well, but, ultimately these guys like James Johnson, DeAndre Bembry, those guys were designed to play around the big three of James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant. And you could see the plan because once those guys were out there playing together, if you go back to that Chicago Bulls game, that Indiana Pacers game, because they only played 2 games in 2021, 2022. If you watch those games, they look great, and everyone around them's playing great. And it's because the roster was designed to be like that. Now, take Kyrie Irving away from that. Take James Harden away from that. Do you get a good roster? No, because everyone's playing basically a bigger role than they are supposed to. Patty Mills was awesome for most of the season until he was exhausted and realized, oh my goodness, I'm playing way more than I should be. And that's because Kyrie wasn't there. And then Harden bails. And now you have Irving and Durant. You have no defense around those guys, right? You kind of lack that playmaker, right? Like Harden was. And, even though Harden was injured, not looking well, not looking like himself, as many people have said, and I was blind to this at the time, I was upset the way Harden left, and I'm going to get into that later. The team was still the 1 seed with James Harden and Kevin Durant. And those are facts, right? And when Irving came back, yeah, they looked really good some nights, but they also looked pretty bad, right? They would lose to teams like Atlanta, who were kind of in the play-in spot, and they would be competitive with a Milwaukee and competitive with a Boston and look pretty good against them, but then ultimately lose at the end. They absolutely blew the brakes off of Philly, which was a fun night to see, but it wasn't consistent. And don't even get me started on the Simmons stuff, because Ben Simmons didn't play. Honestly, it would probably be better for the Nets right now if Ben Simmons would not play. Just a little foreshadowing for what I think of the whole Ben Simmons situation. But talking about James Harden, Sean Marks gets criticized for that move too. He gets criticized for the James Harden trade. James Harden wants to go to Brooklyn. A lot of Philly fans are going to be like, well, I want to go to Philly too. Yeah, but what was reported most at the time was Brooklyn. He wanted to go to Brooklyn. Sean Marks makes the move. A lot of people are like, oh, you gave up all your assets. Yeah, they gave up Jarrett Allen. Would have been nice to keep Jarrett Allen. But ultimately, I think when it comes to Sean Marks making that move, I thought it was the right decision, because you get 3 guys like that on your team in their primes, it usually ends up in a title. Now, the problem is one of those stars was a guy who was completely unreliable. Now, I was not a fan of the way James Harden ended his tenure in Brooklyn. He basically ended up quitting on the team. He scored 4 points in that Sacramento game in a time where the Nets really needed to win. And he just flat out quit. He scored 4 points. It was horrible to watch. And he went out in a way that I can't respect that. But what I will say about James Harden, and his recent quotes actually made me respect him a little bit more. He went out there, he played, and one thing I will never get over, one thing I'll never forget about James Harden is that on a grade 2 hamstring injury, he played 3 playoff games, which was awesome. And it was awesome to watch, and he definitely helped. Despite some people thinking like, oh, he didn't play that well, he didn't shoot that well. Doesn't matter to me. He was on a grade 2 hamstring, he played, and he made an impact. And he helped Kevin Durant. Ended up coming a little bit short, but he made a big shot at the end. And honestly, that was a moment that I had not seen a Brooklyn Net player do. And he became one of my favorite Nets at that point. Now, unfortunately, that went away because he ended up leaving the team. And he left in a way that I can't, understand. Not that I can't understand, but in a way I just didn't respect. And Ben Simmons is even worse. Ben Simmons, I was recently, looking at some old Ben Simmons highlights, you don't even recognize the guy in those highlights because he is such a shell of himself now, and I think it's just best for him to just get off the team. Because even though Durant and Irving aren't on this team, they're still going to be in the playoffs. They're still going to be competing for playoffs every year. They're going to be in the hunts for stars. Like, they're going to be relevant. And I know a lot of people think they're irrelevant because, quite frankly, I don't think a lot of people pay attention to how good this new Brooklyn Nets roster is. But Simmons just has to go. He has to go away, do the whole Markelle Fultz thing, right? Markelle Fultz, oddly enough, in Philadelphia, right, he was basically in a situation where if he was going to succeed, it wasn't going to be in Philadelphia. And he had to go to a smaller market where no one was paying attention to him, where he can improve and get back to the player that maybe not the player people anticipated coming out of college, but just a player that could be good and be productive for a basketball team. And Simmons has to do that. He's got to go to another place. And that's been said before, I know. But despite this situation in Brooklyn, which you would think would be a really nice thing for him, right? Because you have a bunch of 3-and-D wings that could rebound, play defense, and then you can have him basically dribble penetrating, kicking out to open shooters, right? Basically playing, moving the offense and all that. But he just is so not confident in attacking the basket and eating up that space that teams give him. And obviously he's not going to shoot the ball, so it's a 4-on-5. And the defense, while has been pretty good in some times, he also fouls way too much. He gives no effort rebounding. And it's just really difficult to watch him play the 5, right? It looks good on 2K. It's always looked good on 2K. You put Simmons and 4 shooters out and be like, why don't people do this? Well, it's because Ben Simmons doesn't rebound. He gives no effort on the rebounding, and he's not an anchor defensively like, say, Joel Embiid. Oddly enough, the big criticism, not the big criticism, but I think a lot of people thought the Simmons and Embiid lineup, Simmons and Embiid pairing was a clunky fit. Meanwhile, Joel Embiid might have been the best teammate for Ben Simmons. The issue is Ben Simmons. Joel Embiid is protecting the rim, allows Ben Simmons to be the best defender he could be on defense, right? And offensively, Joel Embiid could space the floor. He can hit an open 3, right? He can be a low post guy. He can spread the floor, right? He can even create on the pick and roll a little bit. He's such a skilled player. It was Ben Simmons that was basically the reason why that team didn't go farther. And I thought, listen, I ate into it. When Simmons got here, I was so emotional. I was so in my feelings. I was like, all right, enough of Harden. We're going to get this guy. He's going to play defense. He's going to pass. And yeah, he's not going to shoot. But you know what? We need a guy who's going to push the pace, right? Set up open 3-point shooters. Harden brought this slow pace. I was like, okay. And Harden was looking so deteriorated and so much less of himself that I didn't think he was going to recover like the year he has this year. I had never seen a hamstring injury bother somebody that much. So because of that, I was like, oh, it just seems like Harden's going to be worse from now on. He's not even worth that max contract, which now I think he is worth. And I came out and did a hot takes thing. I thought Ben Simmons was going to have a better season than James Harden. And that could not be more false. And it's probably the worst take I ever had because I was in my feelings. I was emotional. And I don't even think Ben Simmons' biggest haters could predict the disastrous season he's had this year. And I hope he can find it somewhere, but right now it's definitely not in Brooklyn, and I think Brooklyn's sick of it, and I think they're going to try and get him off the team this summer. But as far as Kevin Durant goes, right, KD is in Phoenix. I think the favorite to win the title. I think the depth thing is overrated. They got Terrence Ross. I don't think they're going to get Kevin Love. Kevin Love's going to Miami, I believe. But they're going to get enough buyout guys, and they have enough on their bench with TJ Warren, Landry Shamet, right, Campaign. Like, you know, when you have that amount of star power with Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and Durant, and you have DeAndre Ayton down low, they're good enough. You don't even need a healthy Chris Paul. People will be like, well, Chris Paul's always going to be injured in the playoffs. Yes, that is true. But Chris Paul's not going to have as much responsibility to score in the playoffs as he would have before Durant or any of that, right? So now he just basically has to set up everything, and Durant and Booker can do the work, right? Even if Chris Paul does go out, I still like Phoenix a lot. I think Devin Booker can run the offense. I think Kevin Durant's a smart player. I think he can organize things. Devin Booker, as long as Devin Booker and Kevin Durant are healthy, one of those guys healthy in a series gives you a chance. both of those guys with Chris Paul, with DeAndre Ayton, with some solid shooters and players around those guys, like that are good enough. They're not amazing, but good enough. You do that, plus you have Monty Williams as the coach. Phoenix to me is by far, now listen, we got to see them play together, but I think the fit is as good as it gets. I think all those guys could play together. It's like not even close. If Ayton ends up complaining about his role, then you can find something for him in the offseason, because I don't know if you even need DeAndre Ayton on that team. You can get a decent enough center that's just going to basically not complain and do his job. That's good enough if you have Devin Booker, Kevin Durant on your team. It's a good trade, though, for Brooklyn in the sense, though, obviously they're losers because they lose Durant. They lose the ability to compete for a championship this year. But Mikal Bridges is really good. And he's older. He's 26. I still think he has another level to go to. Same with Cam Johnson. You saw Mikal Bridges the other day. He scored, if you did, against Miami, a team that's right behind them in the playoff standings. Very important game for the season. He goes out, scores 45 points, I believe, on 24 shots. And, yeah, Miami didn't have Tyler Hero. They didn't have some guys, but they did have Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. Like, those are the two best players on their team. And they came out, they played well, took care of business. And they had that bad loss to the Knicks. I think that was more of, not necessarily that the Knicks are a way better team than Brooklyn, although I think a lot of Knicks fans are going to see me as a salty Nets fan for saying that. It's a brand new group. So I'm of the opinion that the Brooklyn Nets wing defense, 3-point shooting, and coaching. Jacque Vaughn has been criticized recently because of the rotations. I think you got to give him some time to figure it out. I think post All-Star break, we're going to see what Jacque Vaughn is really made of with this new squad, because Nick Claxton's minutes have dwindled recently, and I don't understand it because he's the only center on the team. I think he's just trying to find something for Ben, and to me, maybe you do one more week of that, but Ben really isn't worth it because Ben's not giving you much. Every time Ben Simmons is on the floor, the team plays dramatically worse. And a lot of Ben Simmons defenders on Twitter have actually been, early in the season, they were praising Ben Simmons' plus-minus when he was really playing on the floor with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. When you play with that amount of offensive talent, the flaws of your offensive game are going to, they're going to be hidden, right? So now he's on this team who, has good players, but doesn't have a Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving when it comes to an offensive talent. So Simmons doesn't look as good when you put him out there. When it comes to Phoenix, though, just to get back to that, I think them getting the Phoenix trade in general, Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, good players, and let's talk about those picks, because that's really what the centerpiece of this trade is. The Nets get 4 unprotected picks. Remember, they got 2 seconds and the 1 unprotected from the Kyrie trade, which is also a very valuable pick. They have their own picks in 2029 and all that, right? But they have enough picks to make a trade for a star now. They could even draft a star, right? Develop one. They have 2 guys that I think have all-star level promise, like Cam Thomas and Mikal Bridges even, but Nick Claxton, I'm talking about a little younger. Nick Claxton, I think, built an all-star case this year. And I think he could be one next year. I think he's been better than guys like Jarrett Allen this year, just for his ability to switch on defense on the perimeter, and the fact that he's been basically the only center on the roster this year that gets significant playing time, because Day'Ron Sharpe really hasn't shown too much improvement. He's shown sometimes that he could be maybe a backup center, but sometimes it just looks like he has rocks for hands. He can't really catch the ball cleanly. I like his activity around the basket, rebounding the ball. But I think when it comes to Nick Claxton, his defensive switching is so valuable that it's not even worth Ben being out there, because Nick Claxton's already a non-shooter. So you develop him. Cam Thomas coming off the bench being your 6th man, allowing him to basically ride, basically take over that bench scoring. Now that TJ Warren's not there anymore, that's pretty good too. And I think he's going to get a lot of time in the playoffs because I expect this team to make the playoffs, if not be a 7 seed play-in team. If they drop, I think they only drop to 7. This team has a lot of really good players. Dorian Finney-Smith, it allows them to be good for the next few years while possibly trading for a star with their draft picks, drafting a future star, hoping that one of those Phoenix picks turns out to be good, or creating cap room to sign a free agent. And despite what Kyrie's comments are, that he was very disrespected in Brooklyn, which is an outlandish and crazy thing to say, Donovan Mitchell when Donovan, he didn't request a trade, but when it seemed like Donovan Mitchell was going to be traded, one of the destinations he had, now the Knicks were on there, one of them was the Nets. He was okay with going to Brooklyn. So, and that was with KD not rescinding his request yet, right? The request of his trade. That was with all the craziness going on in the summer. It wasn't really popular to go to Brooklyn, and still they were on his list. So I think they're always going to be a destination for free agents, and I think they are a good organization. It's just Kyrie Irving created cracks that could basically be peeked into and kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse with every single distraction, with every single unavailable time he wasn't right, anytime he wasn't available. It just made things worse and worse and worse, and it got draining and draining and draining, and it never got better. It was never, and even for a second where it looked like it was, redeemable, and things were finally getting back on track, he requested the trade. So my thoughts, and I think I could speak for all Brooklyn Nets fans, Kyrie Irving, he will be booed when he comes to Barclays Center. Kevin Durant will be cheered. At least I hope he is. As much as I don't like that Durant never criticized Kyrie, he did everything he could on the court, and that's all I cared about. When he didn't play, it was because he was injured, and there wasn't anything else to that. Or the team would basically force him to sit. There were times where he played the whole game. He played 40 minutes, right? And that's why I think Durant will be celebrated here. As far as who's to blame, a lot of people blame Joe Tsai. Joe Tsai, I think, just wanted a team that was going to show up and play. And when he realized that Irving wasn't going to do that and Durant was like a package deal with him, I think Joe Tsai was done with it. And I don't blame him, honestly. Yes, you want to win. Yes, you want stars. They chose team over stars, and stars win in this league. But Kyrie Irving is not just a star, he's a distraction. And I don't think you were getting too far with him, because even if when there was momentum and things were going well, he still wasn't fully on board. Even after these quotes saying, this year's a different year, this year's going to be special. I have a recording of him on opening day giving the opening speech saying this year's going to be special. He can't be trusted. You need trust to win a championship. It's unfortunate, but it's true. And I'll say this to Kevin Durant. If he's ever thinking about coming back to Brooklyn in the future, we'd welcome you even at 38 years old. We don't care. If you want to play another year, be like, you know what? That team's built in something nice. I'll go there, play there maybe 2 more years and try to win a championship again. We'll gladly take you, Kevin Durant. We loved everything you did here. We were annoyed at the trade request over the summer, but ultimately, you could kind of understand that, it was heading in a weird situation. As far as Sean Marks, I think Sean Marks is a good GM. That's just my personal opinion. I think he's taken a lot of heat recently for stuff that the players didn't hold their end of the bargain for. He took a lot of crap for James Harden and Irving basically quitting on the team and the roster not being as good. I think Sean Marks has made some mistakes. I think 2 key mistakes are, I don't know if he should have made the Ben Simmons trade, or at least they should have done more research on, rather than assuming Ben Simmons was just going to be the same player he was. I think it would have been better just to keep James Harden at the end of the day and, let him ride out the year and maybe leave in the offseason. I think it was better to do that. I understand that's a tough decision to make. You certainly don't want to lose a guy for nothing, but James Harden didn't have much value from the way he was playing, and I think you just needed to get those three guys out on the floor together and going. As far as Steve Nash is concerned, it was a bad coaching hire. He had three better coaches on the assistant coaching staff with Ime Udoka, Jacques Vaughn, and Mike D'Antoni. And he went with Steve Nash. And Steve Nash was never respected there. I gave Steve Nash a very long leash. I went to the first game of the season this year and just came to the conclusion that he just wasn't the guy for it. But in the defense of Steve Nash, if Irving shows up and Harden and Irving and Durant are playing basketball all year, I don't think he gets fired. I think he's a championship-winning coach, or at least coaching in the finals. This team only won one playoff series, which is unbelievable. And when those guys all got together, you would have expected them to maybe win one or two, or maybe even more than that. I think more than that is crazy nowadays because things happen in the NBA so quickly. But it just so happened that the Brooklyn Nets had one of the most talented teams in NBA history, or talented trios in NBA history, in a once-in-a-century pandemic. And basically Kyrie Irving wasn't willing to cooperate with the New York City laws, and it ended up hurting this team completely. And if you have to give slice of the blame pies, I think you got to give like very small pieces, in my opinion, to Sean Marks Josiah, even though a lot of Nets fans would be like they get a big part of it. In my opinion, I don't see what else they could have done too much with Kyrie Irving's behavior being like this. I think you have to look at Kyrie and everything that he's done. And I don't mean this to pile on the guy, because don't get me wrong, this hurts. I have 2 Kyrie Irving jerseys. It hurts that he's not on my team anymore. I rooted for him this year. When he posted the anti-Semitic stuff, I was done with him. And then he started playing basketball again, and it was hard for me to accept it. But I was like, all right, this guy's just a spectacular basketball player. But in the end, he disappointed Nets fans. And he says on Twitter, "Thank you for allowing me to live my dream." Yeah, well, when you get back here, I guarantee he's going to be booed. And it's sad because Kyrie Irving has broken a ton of records with the Brooklyn Nets organization. And it's just sad that this is how it ended. It's sad that James Harden and Kevin Durant wanted out because Kyrie was unfaithful and left. And it's sad. And as a Brooklyn Nets fan, done talking about this, but I think the Nets have a good future with a bunch of picks to get basically a ton of assets. They're very flexible future, and they're going to be competitive every year. It's a very unique rebuild, and I think they'll eventually get themselves back on top because I think Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, they're good players. You get all those picks, right? And then you obviously have Dinwiddie, who's a good player, Dorian Finney-Smith, good player, Nick Claxton, Cam Thomas, young pieces to build around. You still have guys like Joe Harris, Seth Curry, right? You just got to get rid of that Simmons contract. But then Dallas and Phoenix, right? I think Phoenix has basically they made this trade to win the championship, and I think they put themselves in a great position to do that. They've never won a championship before, so it'll be awesome to see them in this position to where they can finally win one after having the cheapest owner possible, one of the worst owners ever, running their franchise. And in regards to Dallas, I think it's going to be a disaster because that's the history with Kyrie Irving. Usually it ends in disaster. Listen, I hope I'm wrong. I hope Luka is happy there for Dallas fans, for your sake, for your mental health, because Kyrie Irving puts you through hell. So that's going to be it for the podcast today. We're going to talk about a ton of things here. We're going to talk about sports. We're going to talk about film, entertainment. But I had to get this Brooklyn Nets rant out because it's the right time to basically summarize all the crazy things that went on. It shows that you just got to be more careful with handing stars to your organization. And it's sad from a Brooklyn Nets fan perspective, but hopefully in the future things will be better for that organization. We're going to talk about many NBA topics. I'm not just going to talk about the Brooklyn Nets. I just thought this was one of the most important stories that needed to be told, and you needed to hear it from a Brooklyn Nets fan perspective if you were interested. And so we're going to talk about the next podcast. We're going to talk about Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and a little All-Star break stuff. Not really interested in that, but, we're going to talk a little bit about the All-Star break. And then next week, we're also going to talk about our projections for the Eastern Conference and Western Conference. It's going to be a 2-part series thing. So I really appreciate you guys letting me rant here on the Brooklyn Nets and that whole Big 3 disaster. And I wish you guys the best this weekend. Hope you enjoyed the, 50 minutes, hour-long podcast of me talking here. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for listening to JB Podcast.